Thank you everyone for being here. We've offered free online screenings of Sacred Cow in collaboration with Diana Rodgers, which will be available for 2 more days after this event. So if you haven't had a chance to watch this film, make sure that you do so before time expires. I want to begin by having our panelists introduce themselves and would like to thank them especially for their involvement in making this event possible tonight. Diana, I think it's appropriate if you would start.
Thank you so much. And just thank you for showing the film and having me here. I'm Diana. I'm the director and producer of Sacred Cow and the co-author of the book, Sacred Cow. And so I'm a dietitian mostly and work with people, helping them with weight loss and gut health, but also do lots of other media things on the side. So I'm sure I'll answer lots of questions later. Thank you.
Carrie, if you want to take it away.
Well, good evening, and thank you all for joining us tonight. This has been something that I've looked forward to, that AGA, American Grassfed, has hosted, and making sure that we can get the message out about this film. And now that you've seen it, you see the importance of having farmers talk about what they're doing rather than being talked about. So I'm thrilled to have you all join us. I'm thrilled to have Diana, John, and Greg here with us tonight. So I won't take up much time, but thank you all for supporting what we're doing.
Okay, John?
Yes, John Ikerd. I'm a retired professor of agricultural economics. I retired from the University of Missouri in the year 2000, so I've been retired for a long time. But I spent the second half of my 30-year academic career before retirement working on issues of sustainability in general, but sustainable agriculture and economic sustainability primarily. So since I've retired, I continue to write and speak on these issues. And so whenever I have an opportunity to share my ideas, well, I'm glad to do so.
And Greg?
Good evening, Greg Gunthorp, pastured pig and poultry farmer in LaGrange, Indiana. We have a USDA inspected processing plant on the farm and distribute pork and poultry throughout the Midwest. Used to be primarily to restaurants, but to a variety of different customers now. And very happy to be here this evening and talk about positive changes that need to happen in our food supply.
Thank you. And I'm Michael Payan, your host. I'm a marketing director here at American Grassfed Association. It's just been a pleasure to be a part of the organization. We're going to kick things off with a quick trailer to refresh everyone's memory a little bit since the film.
There's a debate out there about whether or not we should be eating meat.
Red meat is now worse for us in our minds than fat ever could have been, because there are so many more reasons to avoid red meat, not only for your health, but also now for the goodness of others, including not killing animals, and for the good of the planet.
You can't blame people for being confused.
They're trying to make really important moral and ethical decisions about what they should eat and how they should live. It's easy to fall for extreme, simple answers.
The majority of meat produced in this country is under such abhorrent conditions. We both are making reactions to the same evil, if you will. They're just different choices of how to do it.
But what if we're arguing about the wrong thing?
You look at the Midwest now in the United States, it's corn and soy, and corn and soy, and more corn. This massive amount of monoculture is having devastating effects on the environment. What used to be great biodiversity is gone.
The agricultural revolution has been transitioned into the processed food revolution.
If you want to fatten up your animals, you put them in a pen where they can't run around and get physical activity, and you feed them lots of grain. Humans are like that too.
What if the very animals we're fighting about are a key piece of fixing what's broken?
The animals are going to die, and your only choice now is to do it well. That is the only choice left. Are we going to be the death that's killing everything, Or are we going to be the death that's part of the cycle of life that actually makes life stronger? Those are really our only options.
I guess we're going to get started then. Diana, I have a question for you first. Being that you're a dietitian, why did you write the book, Sacred Cow, and why did you want to do this documentary?
Sure, thank you. I have spent the last 18 years of my life living on working farms and have noticed that the dialogue about how we're going to feed the future, how we're going to, feed all these people moving forward and fix everyone's health must be plant-based. That's just what the nutritionists are saying. That's what the environmentalists are saying. And it's just not the way that I view nutrition or agriculture. And so, as I'm watching films like Cowspiracy and What the Health being played in public schools by the science teachers, I felt that there was a real huge need for a film that would at least be a point of new dialogue about the impact that meat has on us nutritionally and especially environmentally. So the film, as you know, mostly focuses on the environmental case for better meat. We touched on the methane, the greenhouse gas issue, of course, is the biggest issue that especially the fake meat companies have really clung on to, because that's really all they can cling on to. So we did address that, but we also really wanted to make sure that people understood that there's so much more than just the greenhouse gas issue. And so the book is a companion to the film. It's what I started before even the film, but then I realized everyone is learning their information from films and they're so effective. So the book is more heavily, equal as far as nutrition, environment, and ethics, where the film is just a little more focused on the environment, but we do address nutrition and ethics within that mix.
Thank you. The next question is for John Ikerd. I've known you for years, and I always love to talk to you about these issues because I feel like you have a really balanced perspective, being half of your career was spent as a proponent, like you said, for the industrial system, where the latter half has been dedicated to changing that system. Can you tell the folks listening about your career that lends so much credibility, as well as your views on how we got to this industrialized system and how we can fix it?
Yeah, let me just give you a real quick sketch of my background. I've been involved in livestock really the whole time. I grew up on a small dairy farm down in Southwest Missouri, and I was fortunate enough to be able to go to the University of Missouri that time, back when poor folks could still afford to go to state universities. So, but after my BS degree from the University of Missouri in agricultural economics, I then worked for the Kansas City stockyards for a while, and then I worked for 3 years with Wilson Packing Company, which was the 4th largest meat packer in the country at that time. And then I came back to graduate school and got my PhD in agricultural economics. And I was one of these typical agricultural economists that says that farming has to be a business, not a way of life. You have to farm for the economic bottom line. We were going to make agriculture more efficient. We were going to make good food affordable to everybody, create profit opportunities for family farmers, and that was going to create viable rural communities. So it was going to work for everybody. Well, I came to the realization in the 1980s, which I still refer to as the farm financial crisis, that it wasn't working, that what we thought would happen, and I think in good faith we started out on that, it wasn't happening. This was the time whenever the farmers that had followed our advice in terms of, how to make farming a business, followed the industrial model, specialize, standardize, consolidate, get bigger or get out. That's what we talked about. You've got to expand in order to have economic efficiency. Well, I came to the realization that as some farmers get bigger, we were expanding production much faster than demand was increasing. That meant that other farmers had to get out whether they wanted to or not. And that's what we saw during the 80s. farmers that had followed our advice during the 80s of getting big rather than getting out had done so by borrowing a lot of money at record high interest rates. We got into the 1980s, the export markets dried up, commodity prices fell, farmers were caught with huge debts that they couldn't even pay the interest on, let alone the principal. And so farm foreclosures, bankruptcy, farm suicides were common at that time. And I said, there's something fundamentally wrong with that kind of agriculture. It wasn't good for the farmers. It wasn't good for the rural communities that depended upon those farm families, not just for agricultural inputs, but for somebody to shop on Main Street for clothes and cars and haircuts, and somebody to keep the schools open and have enough people for a doctor and a whole range of things. And then I looked around and I could see, you know, it wasn't good for the land. That was kind of the third thing. It wasn't good for farmers, wasn't good for communities, wasn't good for the land. We were destroying the environment with agricultural chemicals and biological waste and so on. And so that's when I had a change in career in midstream, and luckily the sustainable agriculture movement was coming on then. And I could see that, you know, that made sense, because sustainable agriculture was about balancing the need to make a living with being a good, responsible member of a community, raising good families, being strong communities, and taking care of the land, taking care of the natural environment, and balancing all of those things together. And one of the first papers that the first articles, short articles I published for Small Farm Today magazine was on the role of livestock in sustainable agriculture. And so I've been kind of on that theme ever since. And I think that's kind of enough of it, because I've talked about, you know, what I've done since then, but that's kind of what led me to this point, realizing what was wrong with the agriculture system that we have and seeing a vision of something was fundamentally better. And that fundamentally better included livestock.
Thank you, John. The next question here is directed to Carrie. As the executive director of the American Grassfed Association, as well as a multi-generational farmer, can you tell us about why consumers should be looking for the American Grassfed Association label, and what makes that certification stand out for a consumer?
Well, we started with certifying grass-fed in 2007. The organization started in 2003 when the USDA was going to allow a grass-fed label claim to be fed 20% grain, given antibiotics, hormones, and confined, and be called grass-fed. So we tried to work with the USDA from 2005 until 2007 to come up with a meaningful claim, and they finally just said, we're not going to discuss how the animal was raised, where it ate, or what it was given antibiotics or hormones. We're just going to say as long as it was fed a forage-based diet. So we started on the certification program. Since 2007, we have seen a huge increase in what we call grass watching. Grass-fed is one of the buzzwords in the marketplace right now, and we're seeing a lot of bad labels and misleading labels. In fact, I was on a panel this morning with another group, and I saw a label that said grass-fed marine collagen by collagen, marine collagen, but it's grass-fed. So when you see the American Grass-Fed label on a package, you know that farm has been inspected. It's been every 15 months, somebody goes out to the farm and sees it. If you look at our standards, it's 100% forage-based diet, no antibiotics, no hormones, and no confinement feeding. So we think it's important that that's what the consumer believes when they're buying a grass-fed product. And it's really important right now that the bandwagon that everybody's jumping on with grass-fed has some credibility, and we believe we have a real credible label. And we believe the consumer who spends their dollar should get what they're paying for.
Thank you, Carrie. The next one is for Greg. Can you tell the viewers about your history as a farmer? I know you do processing on your farm as well as sell online, and we even buy your meat out here in Delaware. To me, it seems like you've reinvented what's been lost through the industrial system in terms of infrastructure. And there's not as many small processors anymore as rural America has slowly crumbled away. Can you tell us about the issues that you faced bringing your business to the level it's at today, and what was involved in getting USDA processing on your farm, and why this is a hurdle for so many farmers that are looking to break the mold today?
Sure. let me start back a little bit before that. Grew up on a diversified crop and livestock farm just a mile and a half from here. My dad and brother still farm that ground. My family's raised pastured pigs for at least 4 generations. In 1994, my wife and I split off from my parents because my dad said that the hog market was finished for independent hog farmers. The industry was consolidating very rapidly. In 1998, just 4 years into my wife and I being independent hog farmers, found out that my dad was correct. We sold live pigs for less than what my grandpa sold them for. In the Depression, we netted as low as 5 cents a pound for live pigs. I told myself I didn't want to be the last Gunthorp to raise pigs, and that we weren't going to quit. And we sold our first pig to a restaurant that year. Was Charlie Trotter in Chicago, and quickly realized that the biggest bottleneck for farmers to legally get meat and poultry to their customers is that processing obstacle. The processing industry in the United States is a virtual monopoly. For example, beef, 4 packers control about 85 to 86% of the beef industry. The small processors have largely disappeared, partially because of USDA regulations, but I'd argue mostly because of economics. It's just not possible for little processors to compete without a good, viable niche market. And we were been really fortunate through this last 20 years. We made some connections with some great chefs. Made a connection with Chef Rick Bayless in Frontier Grill in Chicago. He's expanded tremendously through these last 20 years and took us along for the ride. We've expanded regionally. We don't sell just into Chicago. We also do Indianapolis, Fort Wayne, Toledo, Ann Arbor. It was quite an experience, though, to get a USDA plant on the farm. From the time I filled out the grant of inspection application and sent it off to the Chicago district office, it took us 14 months to even get USDA to come out and talk to us. That's improved quite a bit nowadays, but it's an awful lot of paperwork. It's an awful lot of hurdles, and it's extremely capital management and labor intensive, and it becomes very difficult for anybody that wants to get into the business to be able to both afford it and to be able to meet all of the requirements. And we were able to do that 16 years ago. We got USDA inspection on the farm, and I believe that we're one of only 3 in the country that slaughter both red meat and poultry under USDA inspection on our farm. It's been an amazing journey. It's been difficult and challenging, but I think in the long term, I think we need a lot more small and very small processors in this country, both for our food culture, but also for the resiliency and the food security aspect, and also for all of the other tributes mentioned in this documentary, for the welfare of the animals, for the health of the soil, for rebuilding our rural communities, lots of reasons to rebuild local and regional food systems.
Thank you, Greg. Diana, there's a part in the film where there's a couple who describes their farm as a black hole. They were They were doing monocropping there, I believe. What exactly does that mean?
Oh, I think most of the farmers probably know what that means. And John talked about it a lot in the interview that he came to New York and did for us. And some of the other experts did too. And I wish that I was able to emphasize that more in the film. I think most of the public can relate to either their small town or just driving through small towns in America and seeing everything boarded up. And that's largely due to the loss of the small farm. And so in the process of going through the Ranching for Profit education program that they did, they were able to really refine their business model and have something that they can leave to their kids, while it's also improving the environment. So that's one of the lovely things I like a lot about the way Ranching for Profit approaches farmers. It approaches them with their number one concern first. How can I make this something that I can leave to my kids? And, because so many farmers are doing so many things that they love to do, but maybe aren't, the most profitable. So it's helpful to have the peer leadership that they do through Ranching for Profit. And also, I don't mean this to be like an ad for Ranching for Profit, but I was really impressed with them and what I saw at Holy Cow in Indiana. We're just not going to have the return of a strong rural economy without the return of strong small and medium scale farms.
Exactly. John, the change in agriculture to the industrialized system and monocropping using synthetic fertilizers was originally described as a miracle for our farmers. Was it a miracle?
Well, it seemed to be, I'm sure, at the time. I can remember the early years when nitrogen fertilizer was getting onto farms like ours. In fact, I was in the vocational agriculture program in high school, and I went home and talked my dad into doing a soil test on a cornfield. And that was the first time that we'd use fertilizer other than just a little fertilizer in the row whenever we planted the crop. And so we had a field there that, I don't know, was 7-9 acres something, that typically would get maybe 50, 60 bushel per acre or whatever. We went and tested the soil and increased the seeding rate and put the first application of nitrogen fertilizer on or complete fertilizer, the high nitrogen, which would, I think, 2/3, 3/4 of the total requirement we were supposed to side dress, but we never got around to side dressing. But anyway, we got about 85 bushel of corn out of that field that year. And I mean, it was just almost like magic. And I talked to extension agents later on that would be out working with farmers on pastures, and they would go out to a field and they would lay a big blanket or a tarpaulin in the middle of the field, and they'd spread nitrogen on the rest of that pasture. And then they'd come back, after a few rains, and that nitrogen, everything was just greened up. Everything was just totally different from where they'd been covered and didn't get covered with nitrogen. So it seemed like a miracle in terms of many of the soils were lacking in nitrogen. And after that point in time, you could totally change the way that you farmed. Before then, you had to have basically integrated crop and livestock systems because you had to fertilize the land with livestock manure, or you had to have crop rotations where you had pastures, legumes, and various other things in the rotation with the corn crop or with the wheat crop or whatever else you had in order to rebuild the fertility of the soil. So once you had nitrogen fertilizer, not only could you increase the yields immediately, but you could also break away from the crop rotations, integrated crop and livestock systems, and you could specialize then in 1 or 2 field crops and just continue to grow it year after year. And that had a big impact on livestock. Both of the industrialization of crop production and livestock production was very closely related, because once you could specialize in the crop production, then you no longer needed the diversified farms that had both. And so you could specialize in the livestock production as well. And once you took the livestock production off of those integrated farms, you had to expand dramatically in terms of acreage, because the livestock was what added value to the feed grain crops so that you could support a family on a mixed farm. And that's one reason family dairy farms have lasted longer than many of the others, because you can still have the livestock and crops on the same farm. But when you separated, then you went into large-scale confinement animal feeding operations, and then you had the large industrial livestock operations, and the industrial livestock operations supported by government programs then provided a steady supply of large quantities of feed that you could depend on. So that allowed the confinement animal feeding operations to continue to expand along with the livestock operations. So they feed on each other, but it went back to that time whenever fertilization first, and then the pesticides. Once you specialized, you're going to make crop rotation, then you had to bring in pesticides. But that whole system is all integrated together, and that's what brought us to a large industrial livestock system of production, processing, distribution. You couldn't have the huge packing plants we have today without the huge feedlots that are committed to bringing those animals in. Hundreds of thousands and millions of animals have to march to those slaughterhouses day after day. And when we saw the COVID pandemic come along, those slaughterhouses closed, we had those millions of head of livestock headed for those slaughter places and no slaughterhouses, no place to go and no way to slow them down. So it really revealed the fragility and the lack of resilience in that system. But it all began back with the fertilizers, pesticides, and various other things that allowed for the specialization, standardization, control of the production process in agriculture.
Thank you, John. Next one's going to be directed to Carrie. When we talk about how the farm systems were converted to this industrialized model, what was the sacrifice in terms of instinctive animal behavior? And what impact does this have on the products for the consumer and for everyone living on this planet?
Well, I can't speak for everybody living on the planet, but the animals that we're talking about, ruminant animals and even pigs and poultry, were are made to peck, hunt, graze, and forage. And when you take them and confine them and take them out of their natural herd and put them in a confined feeding operation, first of all, they're separated from their herds unless they're integrated somehow, which John, we'll all tell you they don't do that. They just throw them in most of the time. Instinctively, those animals are meant to just to move, and they can't. And they're also, if you look at a good herd of cattle, is that they graze at certain times of the day because they graze right before dark so that their pheromones are giving off healthy pheromones, so it keeps predators away. And if you've got them on a regimen feeding where they're dropping feed at a different time instead of what their biology is telling them when to eat, then they don't know what, I mean, they're sitting on the sofa basically is what a human is doing. So we need to get them back to eating when they are supposed to be eating. The impact to the consumer is that they're getting a product that is being fed a diet that these animals are not meant to eat, and it makes them sick, for lack of a better term. So then they have to be propped up with something that makes them better, so that they can maintain while they're in these alternative systems. In the case of, like, if you go to a place like Greg's, where his pigs are out on pasture, his chickens are out on pasture, they're happy. They're eating bugs. The pigs are running around, and it's always fun to watch them and watching what they're doing and watching how they're taking care of each other. And it's really good. It's wonderful to watch. And if you go to some of our other farms like White Oak Pastures or some of our Tomcat Ranch or some of the other places, if you watch these animals, even our farm, where you watch these animals, move at different times of the day, and they stay together, and they have really kind of an interesting pattern. But when you take that ability for them to have an instinctive herding process, then they're like, it's just not good. I don't want to belabor it. I was at a conference in Montana one time, and they were talking about confined feeding operations. There were some wonderful people there, and the gentleman looked at me and said, he said, if you see animals in a feed yard, he said, if you look in their eyes, they've lost their soul. And he said, if you see a bison in a feed yard, you've lost your soul. So it's not a good place for animals to be. And I think all of us on this panel have been in those large feeding operations. And it's just really disconcerting to see them not be able to enjoy being out and about.
Thank you, Kay. The next one's for Greg. The film talks about the average commodity farmer losing money on commodity crops. why do we still see so many people taking this route today?
I'm in the middle of corn and soybean country here in Northeast Indiana, and it's really abnormal for there to be any kind of operations that have pastured livestock or pastured poultry. And I think the biggest reason for that is that our whole agricultural system has done an excellent job, and I don't consider that excellent, but the system has done an excellent job at transferring all of that risk away from the agricultural businesses and shifting it towards consumers and taxpayers. Our neighbors get subsidized crop insurance. They get large subsidies, but the biggest risk shifting thing is that they get subsidized crop insurance. They get guaranteed revenue insurance, and I think the latest figure is that the government pays for about 62% of the premiums for that insurance. We get zero insurance for our revenue. We take the risk of raising the animal, processing it, selling it, and once you go down that road, you can see these guys, the scale that they're increasing at is kind of really crazy. It's getting where the average age of the farmer in our community, we're really probably down to the last generation of crop farmers and independent livestock farmers. That average age is up around 60 something. And the crop farmers in our area, the largest of them farm 4,000 to 10,000 acres. That's massively different than when I was young, when you drove up and down the roads and every 160 to 400 acres had some dairy cows or some sows, and they were supporting families. Most of these operations don't even support families anymore. We've really blown rural America up as far as from its economic standpoint.
Exactly. Thank you, Greg. Diana, this next one's for you. There's a lot of talk about the problems with the industrialized food system, but we don't always hear about the solution. I think the solution has become evident to me in my time with AGA. Is regenerative agriculture the holy grail, the true solution to our broken food system?
I've thought about the answer to this. I think John also made a great statement about food sovereignty. And I think that is something really important as we look at the context of where the food is being produced. And so I get a lot of criticism. Oh, this is the whole world can't support, the beef consumption that, no one can we can't have cows for all. And that's not the solution necessarily, cows for all. It might look more like goats in more arid areas, or camels, or, so I think everything needs to be culturally appropriate and regionally appropriate, and definitely not nationally or worldwide mandated, which is the direction it's going in right now. I also have gotten pushback saying, well, regenerative, grass-fed beef is such a small percentage of the overall meat supply. And so, this is just a pipe dream. It's a fantasy. And organics were at, 1% at one point, and they're no longer at that point. And it doesn't mean that it's a bad idea. It doesn't mean that it's not worth fighting for. It just means that it's a small percentage now. But I believe as people start to, hopefully push away from eating ultra processed food, that industry will also, we'll stop making as much commodity grains, and we'll see more regenerative grazing. I mentioned before we got on too, and I see that there's a question here about, doing policy work, but I am talking with a senator right now about getting on a committee to try to get more regenerative grazing on public land. And so I think that the energy towards cattle and towards this idea of like conservation grazing is getting more popular. And I think that it's going to be a lot easier to go the conservation grazing route than it is to say meat is a healthy food through the USDA, because that's not going to happen anytime soon. There's way too many professors that have hung their hat on, promoting meat being bad through very poor science. And so I'm quite optimistic that regenerative agriculture will get much bigger. And it's really, to me, the only solution moving forward on how we're going to feed the rest of the planet.
Thank you. John, one thing I feel that is not focused on enough is the economic health of the community. It's impacted by the type of agriculture that's contained in that community. Why does supporting your local independent family farmers benefit your rural community?
Well, let me go back to kind of before that. I always tell people one of the benefits of being old, you can remember when things weren't like they are today. So I think the answer to that question is tied in with that. When I was growing up, we had diversified independent family farms. We had viable rural communities. This was during the 40s and 1950s, and that period of time after World War II was some very prosperous times. But in my early years, we were still farming with horses. We didn't have supermarkets. We didn't have franchise restaurants. We didn't have any of those things. And so the technologies that came out of World War II, the chemical and the munitions technologies, fertilizers, pesticides, the turn from making Jeeps and tanks to making cheap farm tractors, and all of that change come about. And I can remember that my earliest perception of industrial agriculture was when the old steam engine would come by my country grade school, chugging slowly from one farm to another. Everything else was done by horses. So that was the beginning of industrial agriculture. So what I'm getting at here is within a very short period of time, primarily between the 50s and the 60s, and it really took off in the 70s when we had a fundamental change in farm policy. We shifted from that kind of agriculture to an industrial agriculture. We went from mom and pop restaurants and local grocery stores to supermarkets and franchise and the whole thing. And we did that in a period of about 40 or 50 years. The bottom line is that the alternative to industrial agriculture, where we talk about regenerative agriculture, resilient agriculture, ecological agriculture, holistic resource management, permaculture, organic, real organic, a whole range of these issues. That whole movement is much further along today than the industrial agriculture movement was when we had the policy changes in the late 60s and 70s. We have the potential to fundamentally transform the whole system. Now to the impact on rural communities. There was a very landmark report put together by economists in 1968. It was commissioned by President Johnson. And they come up with a report that they entitled "The People Left Behind." And in this 1968, 1970 report, they said that our policies have lost concept, have lost realization of what's happening to rural communities with the industrialization of agriculture. They said within the last 15 years, we have lost 45% of our rural population. Well, why did that happen? That whole process, specialized, standardized, consolidate, the way you save economically, what makes it economically efficient, is that you employ fewer people, and the people you employ don't need to know as much. They can just kind of farm by recipe or follow the chemical company direction or whatever. So you don't need to pay them as much. And then you simplified the management process so that fewer people can manage larger operations. So you got fewer people in management positions that are earning money. The people that are left employed are people that are low wage, and most of them get displaced. And that's the reason we lost 45%. And they said in that report that if we don't change policies, if we don't change direction, we're going to lose another 45% of what we've got left in the next 15 years. It's no secret that the industrialization of agriculture, including industrialization of the livestock and crop, it's no secret that that destroys jobs and it destroys rural communities. And we've known it for at least the last 50 to 70 years. And they pointed out, and then we had a follow-up report in 2018, I think it was, and a follow-up on the People Left Behind report. And they said nothing's been done. In fact, it's getting worse. So we know what industrialization of agriculture, what industrial livestock operations, what industrial crop operations do in terms of destroying rural communities. And we know the solution is to go to systems that are more management intensive, like the regenerative agriculture, resilience, holistic resource management. All of those require thinking, imagination, creativity, farmers that know how to work with the land, the crop, they know what's going on in the soil, and integrate crop and livestock operations. They're doing the thinking and they get the rewards. If somebody off the farm is going to do all the thinking and develop computer programs that run, robots and guided by drones, those are the people that are going to make the money. And people that are left on the farm, and there won't be many of them if we continue down this road at all, are going to make nothing more than people driving tractors or hog house janitors. So, and we know the solution is to go to an agriculture that's management intensive, that requires imagination, creativity, that requires knowing how to work with things, with the organisms in the soil, to integrate crop and livestock systems into regenerative systems. They'll sequester carbon from the atmosphere. They'll protect the natural environment. They will support viable rural communities. They will feed people healthy feed. We know this stuff. What we need is a fundamental change in farm policies and a fundamental change in educational programs so we tell people the truth.
Thank you so much, John. Carrie, American Grassfed Association only certifies farmers that are grass-fed from start to finish. Can you explain this concept and its importance?
The way that our labeling system is set up in the United States, that it's so dysfunctional that there are a lot of labels that say grass-fed on them. We are grass-fed from start to finish, from birth to harvest. You'll see a lot of animal things say grass-finished, and that has no meaning. It just means the animals have been finished on grass at some point. It's better for the animals. It's better for the consumer. It's better for the end product. And so that's why we do it. Now we do certified pork as well, and they're not ruminants. They're single stomachs, so they do eat some grain. So they're not, but they are pastured, and that's one of the things. It's the way they're raised and what they're eating. But that's really important to us, that when the consumer picks up a package that has our logo on it, or buys from a farm that is certified by AGA, they know that animal's been eating what it's supposed to be eating for all of its life, and never fed things that it's not supposed to be eating. So that's why. And we're very proud of it, and we're gonna stick with it.
Thank you, Carrie. Greg, well, actually, you know what? I mean, anyone feel free to chime in on this one. Looking at this from both the health and a climate perspective, why can't we just eat meat alternatives and call it a day?
Well, I'll answer that, or my thoughts real quickly. First of all, I try not to tell people what and how to eat. I think that people should make their own choices. But if people are going to choose plants, we should eat plants in the fashion that plants come out of the ground, not something that's highly processed plant alternative. We've been down this road way too many times on eating highly processed foods, refined carbohydrates, hydrogenated oils, too much salt, too much of the wrong fats. We really don't need to go down this as a society on meat alternatives. And then lots of people do it because they say that there's, they're doing good for the environment, and they're also that there's going to help hungry people. We have to quit this whole myth that U.S. agriculture is feeding the world. and that by producing more corn and soybeans and confinement animals, that somehow that's solving hunger. We have an issue in this world with food distribution, not food production. We turn 40% of our corn crop every year into ethanol. We used to feed people with agriculture. Then we fed animals. Now we feed cars. And pretty soon those cars are going to be electric, and we won't even need that 40% of corn, which we already have too much of anyways. So if people really wanted to help feed hungry people, they should be generous and donate some money to feed some people that don't have enough money to eat, not eat plant alternatives turned into something that looks like meat.
I'd like to comment real quickly on this alternatives. I think what's driving a lot of this anti-agriculture movement today, I think climate change is just the most convenient thing to oppose animal agriculture. And I think a lot like the alternatives to meat is driven by this also. It gets down to, Diana mentioned previously about it, an ethical issue. People think, well, somehow I'm not killing animals, you know, and this thing about killing animals for food. Well, the reality is that every living thing, every biological being lives by eating something that was once alive or taking something that could have supported something alive in the process of it. That's inherent within the way nature is created. Biological beings live from biological beings. Even the organic matter in the soil that feeds the plants that people eat, that's dead material that the plants eat, and you're feeding the plants. And if you go out and grab a carrot out of the ground and eat it, you're taking the life away from that carrot before it had a chance to grow up and mature and reproduce or anything. Anything that you eat, you're killing something. You got honey or you got milk that could have supported some other life. That's the reality. I think we're created with a natural aversion to killing things, and that's good. We don't want to kill things. We need to respect all of life and respect the fact that is given to support other life. And when our life is over, we need to respect the fact that we're done and we need to make room for somebody else and something else to come. And just, you know, living and dying are all a part of that same process. The important thing is that we show respect for every living thing, whether it's a carrot, whether it's a plant, whether it's a soybean that could have created another soybean plant, whether it's wheat that's in the bread that could have been created other bread, that we show respect for the whole of life and recognize that we are a part of that. And that if animals are here, what's the purpose for the animal? Just what's our purpose and what's the purpose for the plant? We don't know the answers to those things, but we need to figure it out in some way. We're speciest in the sense that we're more reluctant to eat things and kill things that are more like us. How do we know that the things like us are more important to the whole of the creation than the other things that are different from us, that we kill in the process of producing plants, as is shown in the movie?
Diana, did you want to comment on this one?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to navigate over to my mute button. I think John really hit on it. You know, people are scared of death, and people don't have to watch grandma, you know, kill and pluck the chicken anymore. Everyone's living in a more urban environment, and they're being sold a promise by these companies that stand to make a lot of money, that, you know, death doesn't need to happen for their food to be there. And that's a really a simple solution to a very complex problem. These companies are all about intellectual property, and it's very convenient for them to play on the emotional heartstrings of all of these people. And they've got this built-in grassroots marketing fleet of people who are you know, motivated by their disconnection with nature and fear of death, and celebrity culture is helping them out. So, you know, that it's one of the reasons why we did address the greenhouse gas issue in the film, but it's not That's the only thing that they have to hang their hats on, is emissions, pure emissions, not looking at the whole cycle, not looking at land use, and all the inputs and all the high energy processes. And, you know, I also did a blog post looking at the price per pound of Beyond Meat compared to organic grass-fed beef. And guess what? It's almost twice as expensive per pound. But I don't hear people saying that Beyond Meat is elitist, the way that I hear, you know, I'm being elitist by promoting grass-fed beef. So it's, that's all I had to say about that.
You know, I 30 seconds. Processed food and factory food is, whether it's an animal factory or a meat analog factory, it's factory food. And if you just look at it from that angle, I mean, it's being promoted as healthier for everybody. And it goes in one end and comes out the other as something else, and that's a factory. And I thought we were getting away from factory food, so we've invented a new factory. So, but that we can spend all night on that one, and we don't want to.
Thank you, Karen. The next question here is from Eric. He says, great film, and I need to get further into your book as well. My question is that there seems to be a building momentum against the industrial ranching feedlot model toward the family farm model. Do you see a future where the same thing could start taking place for the processing part of the food chain?
Well, I can start on that, and then Greg probably knows a lot more about you're saying a change in the processing part of it. Right now, I see the processing as the biggest bottleneck in the local food system, relocalizing the food system, which I think eventually we'll do. But the absence of modest scale processing facilities, and you need some scale in the processing facilities to achieve some economies of scale, but you don't need to go to the level that we're talking about today. One of the papers I've written recently on the realities of economics of CAFOs points out that small differences in processing plant, like a few dollars a head, means practically nothing to the consumer, because what you're getting per head, like on a beef animal, would be 650, 670 pounds, something like that. I don't know, Greg can tell you that. But when you spread that $2 or $3 over 600 or 700 pounds, you know, it doesn't amount to anything the consumer would even notice. But $2 or $3 a head, if you're killing millions of animals, is 2 or 3 million. You know, it's significant when it goes up to that level. But you do need to bring it down to the levels, because the biggest part of the reason that local produced food is more costly now is because of the higher cost of processing rather than the higher cost of production. Only about 15% of what we spend for food today actually goes to the production level, actually goes to the farmers. It really doesn't make much difference whether it costs more or less for the farmer to produce beef or pork or whatever it is. It really doesn't make that much difference if you're talking about 10, 15, even 20% increases. The consumer would never notice the difference. But when you get it through the processing and distribution system that's designed for this large scale industrial system, and you try to convert that to a local system, then you're adding major costs to it. So if we could start supporting the technologies, with the technologies that we have today, what all we can put in a cell phone, we can surely create a slaughter plant that we can kill thousands of animals rather than millions of animals at a reasonable competitive cost, or in a food processing plant of any kind, you know, fruit and vegetable or whatever it is. So if we shifted the technologies and we shifted the policies, we could have a major impact on what consumers would end up paying for the food that came from local or regional producers, and the local regional producers could get higher prices enough to really support sustainable, ecologically sound, socially responsible systems of production, and the customer could be comfortable knowing that the meat that they eat had that integrity to it, and the cost would be reasonable. Most of the things I've seen, if we made a total transition to a sustainable food system, we might be talking about somewhere between 8 and 12% increase in the cost of food overall. And we saw food prices go up more than that when we started burning up our corn crop for ethanol.
Is there any other comments on that?
Yeah, I have a couple comments on that. You know, first of all, I'll say that, this is a comment from Rick Bayless when he was out. He's been out to visit the farm several times, but you know, the food industry and food service especially has done a really good job of showing food, you know, plating, presentation, and that over the years. It's just been recently that we've started to talk about the story on the production side of agriculture. I don't think there's ever a time that we're really going to talk about the wonderful slaughter plants. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that in general, you know, farmers aren't really valued in this system. I think slaughter plants are valued even less, and I don't honestly foresee that changing. What I do see is that, you know, we've allowed the small processors and small slaughter plants to disappear in this country. And what we really have to do is we're going to have to rebuild this local and regional food system. And I think in general, I think we're going to have to rebuild it at a little bit bigger scale than the locker plant style, you know, to follow up with what Dr. Ikerd was saying. You know, we've got to do thousands of animals, not millions of animals, but, you know, there's a huge L-shaped cost curve in slaughter and processing. And, you know, we don't need to get to the scale of high-speed plants, you know, 400 beef an hour, 1,000 pigs an hour, but we've probably got to do 20 or 40,000 pounds of animals a day, you know, facilities the size of like White Oaks pastures, Natural States, Lorenz. There's a handful now. We need those in every single part of the country.
Thank you. Another question from Sheila is, how can we speed up this movement and get things moving in the right direction?
What was that again, Michael? How can we
speed up the movement to get things moving in the right direction?
It's going to have to be bottom up. It can't be top down. It's going to have to be the consumer knowing what they want and really consumer education. And we've learned that, I believe, and I don't know, John's got some real strong and good opinions about it. I'm sure Diana's too, but we've learned that from the years that almost 20 years that we've been doing this, that we're not going to get the change that we want in policy in a timely fashion. But if consumers will push for it, I think you'll get faster movement.
Well, I think we have to have consumers. People talk about vote with your dollars, and I really agree with that totally. But I also, at the same time, if you just vote with your dollars, then that means that only people that have dollars to vote with are the people that determine what kind of system you got. I personally think we need to realize that good, wholesome, nutritious food is a basic human right. Not everything that you might choose, everything you might want, but everyone has a right to good, wholesome, nutritious food. And the best way to get that is to have a connection of the people that are getting the food with the people that are producing the food, where there's a sense of personal responsibility of the producer to produce good food for people, and a sense of responsibility on the part of the people that are receiving the food to, you know, make sure that the producer can produce good food in a way that's ecologically sound, socially responsible, and so on. And so I think, regardless of what people may think, eventually you have to involve government in that process of ensuring that basic right of people. And we already recognize hunger, food security as a basic public responsibility by the billions of dollars really that we already appropriate at the federal level and spend at the federal level for government food assistance programs. And just as I say, hunger is a market failure, because even though we are an equal inherent worth, we are inherently unequal in our ability to produce things that have economic value And there's always and always will be people who can't earn enough to buy enough good food. And that's the reason it's a legitimate sort of public service. We need to recognize that. And we need to rely on the market for those of us that can afford the market and make our votes with dollars so that we support the producers. But we also need to support public programs, farm bill, community food assistance programs, various other things to make sure that those people get good food. And the best way to do that is reconnect at the local level. I've been promoting the idea of community food utilities, using the concept of a public utility at the local level, and then take the government food assistance funds that go through the utility, and at the local level, you ensure that everyone there gets enough good food to meet their basic needs. And then you let those of us that can afford pay the full price that goes beyond that, and then we can create an alternative local food system on a foundation of feeding the people good food that need it the most and can't afford it.
I could just add one more thing. One thing that we've seen from COVID is that the people that are suffering the most from COVID are the ones that are metabolically broken. So in America, we have 70% of Americans are either overweight or obese. Type 2 diabetes is going up and up. And nobody seems to be really talking about, if folks maintain their own personal health, that's one of the best, most sustainable ways to participate in society. And so I would really love to see our dietary guidelines not run by the USDA, which is promoting commodity agriculture, and look more like the Brazilian dietary guidelines, which encourage home cooking. They talk about not eating ultra processed food, not believing the marketing claims that processed food manufacturers are putting on their labels. And so I do see a lot of people turning back to eating real food. And those are the ones that are really, like I was just at White Oak Pastures actually, and Will is just so thrilled with this paleo movement, the real food movement. I mean, they're the ones who are really buying his meat. And I think with the internet and Instagram, people have more access to these diets that aren't necessarily the ones coming out of Harvard, discouraging meat and encouraging ultra processed foods. And so, we're sort of seeing more of a democratization of health information. And so with all that together, I think the ground up is a great way to go, but also there's the commodity crop insurance and all of that needs to be addressed as well.
Thank you. I'm going to combine these next two. They're pretty similar here from Margaret and Ed. Margaret says, if you graze correctly and build diversity in your grasslands, methane is decreased from ruminants. Do people understand that regenerative ag can reduce this? Caring for grasslands and building diversity promotes health, ruminant function. I just think this needs to get out to the public. It's really not a question, but something that she feels is important. Science shows that healthy grasslands can reduce methane emission from ruminants. And thanks for a great Q&A. I guess it all comes down to how do we educate people, and especially thank you, Diana, for a wonderful film. The next one from Ed, pretty similar here, is what are some of the best methods you've seen at a retail or local level to educate consumers, to build on the progress made by heroic movies and books like Sacred Cow, and to help create the demand that's going to be required to see this system change?
Well, thanks, Mimi, for bringing that forward. Is that the methane issue and that Diana delves into in her film answers a lot about the boogity-boo around animal agriculture and methane, and I think that's very important. The movie and the book both address a lot of things that consumers should be aware of. The internet and social media has done a lot good and bad for both. We're hopeful we're very hopeful with the pandemic that people are starting to recognize the frailty of their food system. And we're getting, as you know, I said earlier today on a panel, I said, out of the ashes rises a phoenix. So, you know, I don't, it's not an end all, it's not a cure all, but I think that consumers are informed. And I agree with John completely that water and food are basic human right. And I think that some of these feeding programs that are now reaching out to sustainable, regenerative farmers and buying their products to put in these food boxes is critical to put good food in the hands of people that otherwise couldn't afford it. And there's a lot of stuff going on right now. So it starts in the schools. We're also seeing that where kids are being fed really good food at school, and they go home and they tell their parents, I'm not eating that stuff anymore. You got to give me this. So we start young, and we're feeding our most vulnerable populations the worst food, our children and our elderly. My mother's in assisted living right now, and every time I walk in when they're serving dinner, I do this. But it's got to change on both ends.
Yeah. I just think very, very, very briefly, just personalize it. I think we've got to localize and personalize the message. And I think one of the best ways to do that, if we could use government food assistance programs to get the people that need it most and that are suffering the most from obesity and diabetes and heart disease and various things because of a poor diet. They're just eating what they can afford to get the calories. If we could demonstrate in those communities the improvement of health and the improvement in people's attitude toward food and the kind of foods they want and the kind of foods they select, it would serve as a demonstration to the rest of the community, hey, this is a better way to eat. And I just think somehow that we've got to personalize the whole thing so we accept sort of a personal responsibility of helping each other rather than trying to depend on mass media and mass messaging to get the message across.
Yeah, I'll just add one more thing, and that is funding. Carrie knows how hard it was for me to get the money together to raise this film, and you know, I'm very poorly funded, and there's not a lot of people out there that are independent that are saying messages like this. And so, you know, Beef Checkoff says that meat is healthy. You know, consumers are going to be skeptical of that because, of course, you know, these plant-based documentaries that are coming out are very well funded by pea protein industry and other plant-based, you know, companies that have massive profit. And so it's really hard to be someone independent that pushes out this information. It's a huge risk. And it's a lot of time, and it doesn't pay at all. So yeah.
Thank you. This next one's from Eric. Do you have any thoughts on small farm exceptions for pigs, sheep, and cattle comparable to the small farm chicken exception? Didn't get a lot of context there. Is anyone familiar?
That would be a question for Greg as far as the exception for either on farm or small processing. I think that's what he's looking for, Greg.
Yeah, he's looking at, you know, there's exemptions for 1,000 and 20,000 poultry per year that is honored in most of the states where you don't have to have USDA inspection. There are no exemptions for any red meat. The Prime Act would be what would put exemptions for red meat in, and doesn't really gain a lot of traction ever. And I'd argue that long-term, I mean, I think it'd be good for, and I'm not opposed to it, it'd be good for a few farmers. But I think really to bring about the change that we need a sane and reasonable inspection system for small and very small processors. And we need to figure out a means. You know, the other thing I didn't add on that processing sector, there's an awful lot of venture capital goes into the marketing end on all of these, you know, in the meat and poultry and the regenerative ag space. There's nowhere near the funding that goes into the production, and especially nowhere near that goes into the processing side. You know, it's going to take a lot of investment to rebuild the food system.
Thank you. This next one's from Ed. To Carrie's point about the schools, are there any particular school systems that you're familiar with that we could model or learn from?
There's some, Ann Cooper, who's a friend with the Boulder County schools in Colorado, started the Renegade Lunch Lady, and so she's built a system. So you might look to that. Slow Food has worked on some curriculum and criteria. I think we should look to our own school system. I think we should start feeding children who are getting reduced lunch better food than what we're giving them right now. But we deal with a group called the Global Grassfed Alliance, and some of the food that's served in other schools in other countries is heads and shoulders above what we're feeding our children. And we can certainly look at that and put some stuff on our website about other school systems. And Michael, you and I can do the research on that, and we will be more than happy to share any resources that we have. But again, it's so few and far between. There was the edible schoolyard, but again, these are pockets, and it needs to be part of our school lunch program. It needs to be part of our curriculum. And instead of taking a school lunch period and making it 18 minutes so that they have to gobble food, and making it part of a whole day's process where children sit and eat together instead of just, grabbing food and going with it. And that's my opinion. I don't think we should, make it something that they have to do, but make it part of their whole curriculum day.
Thank you. Just one final question for everyone tonight. Definitely directing this towards Diana to start, but please, again, everyone feel free to chime in on this one. It appears that in producing this documentary that you were looking to answer a question about our food system. Everywhere you look today, there's so much watered down jargon, countless reports and perspectives based on who's making those reports. It seems like you were trying to find deeper answers to an important question. And I want to open that question to everyone here. Should we be eating meat? If we should, how much? What kind? What have you learned here?
In the book, I actually make the case that a lot of people actually aren't eating as much meat as I think they should. I think when we say we need to eat less meat, it's like less than what? Or, when you tell people eat a moderate amount, moderate compared to what? Animal source foods are the most important foods to human health. Protein is the most satiating macronutrient, and we don't have a carbohydrate requirement actually at all. I'm not saying don't eat them, but we do have a protein requirement, and a lot of people aren't even meeting it. And so when I hear that eat less meat, I think that comes from a very emotional place and not a very evidence-based place. So I did look into the RDAs of, where did that come from? Where did this RDA come from for our meat requirement? It's based on really poor science. So in the book, I go through what I believe is a more appropriate target for meat or animal source protein requirements. And I do believe animal source protein is far superior to plant-based protein. And it's not just in a belief or opinion, it's just biologically true. And there are people, there's a group called the True Health Initiative, which is led by a group of vegans that are actually trying to change the definition of bioavailability of protein at the government level. Like they're really trying to put beef at the bottom and soy towards the top. And so, yes, I believe we should be eating animal source foods. I think they're really, really important. And when we say eat less meat or vilify meat, the ultra processed food industry wins.
I'll take a shot at this one, and I think it starts with kind of our perception, which I think are the most important questions of our belief of how the world works and where we fit within it. You know, the industrial system is that the world is a resource for us to exploit, and we're separate from it. So we take whatever we can, and it's a bottomless, endless source of resources. And I think we're learning now that that's creating a lot of problems. The alternative worldview is that the world is a big living organism with all kinds of living species, and that we're just one of those. And so to me, the question of what we should eat, whether we should eat more or less meat, we need to find our place within that a healthy global natural ecosystem as a species within that. I happen to think that we're an animal eating species. That I agree with Diana. I think that's the reason they're dependent on animal proteins and things of that nature. That's just the way we're created. That's our niche within that overall creation. And I think if we find where we are and accept our responsibilities as kind of caretakers of the earth and caretakers of each other, then the amount of meat that we eat to sustain that system and have that system indefinitely sustain us will be determined by the nature of the system. I personally believe that we will end up eating meat and raising animals will be an essential part. As I said, one of the first articles I wrote in Sustainable Agriculture was the role of animals in a sustainable agricultural system. I believe that's where we belong. I'm not smart enough to know for sure if that's really the truth, but I think the question ought to be is if we fit and fulfill our responsibilities within nature, our responsibility to each other and to the earth, then how much meat we eat, and that's what we ought to do. We ought to raise that number of animals and eat that amount of meat.
Thank you. So I think that wraps it up for tonight. I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight and everyone who helped make this event possible. Definitely check out Diana Rodgers' Meat Curious course. That's available. Diana, you can tell them exactly where that's available.
SacredCow.info is the website, and I've got a newsletter and a little shop where people can buy the DVD or the book or t-shirts and the course Meat Curious.
Thank you. As well as the book, as she said. John Ikerd, if you want to check out his website at johnikerd.com for more information. American Grassfed Association, of course, we're a source for consumer questions. Come visit us anytime at americangrassfed.org or to get certified as one of our certified producers. If you would like to check out Greg Gunthorp's farm or order meat from him, you can visit www.gunthorpfarms.com. Unless anyone has anything they'd like to add, I think we can wrap it up for tonight's session.
I'll just say thanks. I've enjoyed it. I always learn when I go on these things. Greg, I'm always learning stuff from Greg. I pass on to other people, and the same thing will be true of Diana and Carrie as well.
Diana, thank you so much for making this available, and we hope that we can move this thing forward, and we'll do whatever we can to make that happen because we think it's really important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your turn, Greg.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoyed this. Look forward to fighting the fight with everyone to brighter and more prosperous rural America and better food supply. Thanks.